Have you ever heard of people who seem to fit into a place or a time period so well that it seems they must belong there? A woman living in New York City during the 1930s was so enamored with old-fashioned ways of life that she built her own house inside the walls of an apartment building. But why would she do this? And what did the neighbors think about living next to someone who was building their own home from scratch in the middle of a city? In New York City in the 1930s, a socialite named Helen Viola lived in an upscale apartment on Park Avenue. She had everything she could have possibly wanted, including money, fame, and looks. So why wasn't she happy? Born in 1898, Helen Viola grew up in a wealthy family. Her father was a famous publisher, and he made sure his daughter never wanted for anything. She had expensive tastes and loved nothing more than the finer things in life, like expensive clothing, fancy parties, and luxurious vacations in Europe. But Helen had a secret. While she enjoyed the luxuries her money could buy, she was fascinated by the simpler times before electricity and modern conveniences. She spent most of her free time collecting antiques and restoring old furniture. She also had an obsession with the past and would often dress up in Victorian clothing and spend hours looking at old photographs. Helen was also interested in spiritualism and would attend seances regularly. At one such event, she met a medium who told her that her soul was hundreds of years old and that she had lived many lives before. This only added to her fascination with the past, and she began to feel that she did not belong in the modern world. As Helen got older, her fascination with the past only grew. She became increasingly convinced that she was a Victorian woman trapped in a modern body and began to plan her escape. She started small, decorating her apartment in the style of the Victorian era. She then began to spend more and more time in her apartment, shunning parties and social events in favor of her collection. As the years went on, Helen became increasingly reclusive and her apartment became a shrine to her obsession. Then, in the late 1920s, something happened that changed everything. Helen was browsing an antique store when she came across a book called The Philosophy of Spiritualism. The book was written by a man named Andrew Jackson Davis, who was a popular spiritualist lecturer in the mid-19th century. Helen was captivated by the book and began to read it cover to cover. She soon realized that Davis's ideas were very similar to her own, and that he was essentially saying the same things that the medium had told her at the seance. Helen became convinced that she was meant to be a spiritualist and that she could communicate with the dead. She began holding seances in her apartment and inviting friends to participate. But not everyone was as skeptical as Helen. Some of her guests actually believed that they were able to speak with spirits during the One day, Helen had an idea. She decided to build her own house inside the walls of her apartment. She figured that if she decorated her apartment to look like a Victorian house, then she could live out her fantasy and pretend that she was living in a different time period. Helen hired a team of contractors to help her create her dream house. They built walls and installed plumbing and electrical systems. They also put in a kitchen and a bathroom, completed with a clawfoot bath. Helen furnished the house with antiques and bric-a-brac, and she soon had created a home that was truly unique. But how did her neighbors react to living next to someone who was building their own home from scratch in the middle of a city? When the construction began, Helen's neighbors were understandably annoyed. They had to put up with the noise and the mess, and they weren't happy about it. But they eventually agreed to let Helen go ahead with her plan. However, they soon realized that they had made a big mistake. As Helen's house began to take shape, the walls and floors started to sag. The plumbing system leaked and flooded the apartment below Helen. The neighbors complained to the building manager, but he didn't do anything about it. He knew that Helen was a wealthy woman and he didn't want to upset her. The neighbors were furious. They couldn't believe that they were being forced to live in a building that was slowly falling apart. They considered moving out, but they couldn't afford to rent an apartment anywhere else in the city. Helen continued to ignore her neighbors' complaints. She was so focused on creating her dream house that she didn't care what anyone else thought of her. As the years went on, the condition of the building continued to deteriorate. The windows and doors wouldn't close properly, and the walls were covered in cracks. The neighbors were fed up and they decided to take action. They hired their own lawyer and sued Helen for damages. Helen was finally forced to make some changes. She had to repair the damage she had caused to the building, and she also had to pay her neighbors for their suffering. But even this didn't stop Helen from pursuing her dream. She continued to decorate her house, and she even opened it up to the public for tours. People from all over the city came to see the bizarre spectacle of a woman living in the past. Helen was happy to oblige, and she would dress up in Victorian clothing and give tours of her home. People paid admission for the tour by bringing an antique to trade with Helen, and she eventually amassed a huge collection of items from the past. But not everyone was so fascinated by Helen's house. Some people thought it was a strange and creepy place, and they refused to go near it. Helen didn't mind. She was happy to have her own little world where she could escape from the modern world. But eventually, the city decided to step in and put an end to Helen's little world. In the early 1970s, the city condemned the building and ordered Helen to vacate the premises. She refused, but she was eventually evicted and forced to move out. When the city came to clear out Helen's apartment, they found that she had left behind a huge amount of stuff. There were antiques, bric-a-brac furniture, paintings, books, and documents. It was like stepping back in time 100 years. The city sold most of Helen's stuff in an auction, but some of it is still around today. You can find pieces of Helen's collection in antique stores and private collections all over the country. Some people believe that Helen's house is haunted and that her spirit still lives in the walls of the building. Others say that Helen's story is just a cautionary tale of what happens when you let your obsession get the better of you. What do you think? Was Helen right to pursue her dream no matter the cost? Or do you think she was selfish and inconsiderate of her neighbors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more historical tales. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Now let's get back to the video. After Helen was evicted from her apartment, the building was torn down and a new luxury high-rise was built in its place. No one knows exactly what happened to Helen, but some people believe that she died soon after she was evicted. Others say that she moved to a different city and started over. There are conflicting reports about how much damage Helen's house did to the building. Some people say that it caused extensive damage, while others say that it wasn't that bad. However, there is no denying that Helen's house was a major inconvenience to her neighbors. They had to deal with the noise and the mess while the construction was going on, and they also had to put up with the damage that was done to the building. It's unclear why Helen was so obsessed with the Victorian era. Perhaps she felt more comfortable in that time period than she did in her own. Or maybe she was just fascinated by the history of the time. Whatever her reason, she was clearly committed to her dream, even if it meant sacrificing her relationships with her neighbor. If you're ever in New York City, be sure to check out the luxury high-rise that now stands in place of Helen's apartment building. Who knows? Maybe you'll catch a glimpse of Helen's ghost as you walk by. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you think? Would you ever do something as extreme as Helen did to pursue your dreams? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more historical tales. Thanks for watching. See you next time.